have also been notified that there is a 7th victim that died at a hospital located outside of Lake County.
Another victim in the mass shooting at a 4th of July parade in Illinois has died as police charged a suspect, and we learn more about the motivation behind the attack. We have team coverage tonight on the latest developments. Well, joining me now to talk more about the deadly shooting of Jayland Walker is Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He's a professor at Tarleton State University's School of Criminology. Dr. Del Carmen, first off, thanks for joining us. And, what are your thoughts overall on how police handled this situation?
Good afternoon, Julia, and thanks for having me. Well, it's really hard to say at this point. I mean, we don't really have all the facts in front of us right now. What we do know, however, is that this individual had over 60 wounds on his body from various multiple gunshot wounds from police officers. And so that leads us to assume that perhaps, the individual officers either panicked and decided to empty out their magazines on the individual, or they simply did not follow 100% the procedure and protocols that we teach police officers on a daily basis.
So I guess that begs the question then, what could police have done differently?
It's a Monday morning quarterbacking. It's always easy for those of us that are not facing the imminent danger that police officers face on a daily basis. And I will say that if, in fact, Mr. Walker shot at the officers initially, as it's been reported, this whole situation is going to have a very different perspective and a different angle in a few days. Having said that, what typically happens in these kind of scenarios, and we teach police officers to do this, is to simply neutralize the threat. That is to stop the threat from advancing and hurting them or other people. In this case, lethal force would have been required and necessary if, in fact, this individual shot at the officers. Having said that, the question still remains, A, was it justified? And assuming that it was the use of force, did it rise to the level that it really surpassed the guidelines that are provided to police officers nationwide? Meaning, why are there 60 shots on this person's body instead of a couple of shots that would have otherwise neutralized the threat?
Yeah, several high-profile events have made news in recent years. We had, of course, the George Floyd. Events like that, do you think this has at all changed the way police are responding, or does it make them more hesitant? Obviously, maybe not so in this case.
I think the death of Mr. Floyd changed a great deal of things in law enforcement that we have yet to see in the next 5 to 10 years. But I can tell you, someone that's trained over 15,000 police officers, Julie, I've been a criminologist for 25 years, that we see that the law enforcement field is changing and will change in years to come. Whether or not that change was viewed or seen or it was evident in Akron, Ohio, we don't know. But what we do know, however, is that adrenaline is flowing, and all the studies and all the case studies that we've done in years of law enforcement training show this, which is officers rush to the scene, their heartbeat is going, and they're going to do whatever it takes to neutralize the threat. In this particular case, you had multiple officers shooting at one single person, where logic would have suggested that after a couple of rounds, that person and that threat would have been otherwise neutralized. There was simply no reason to shoot the person 60 times. We can understand it from a psychological perspective, but in terms of police procedure, it falls outside of what we teach cops to do.
So you said that, things are changing and they will continue to change in light of some of these events, but can you think of something in this particular situation that would have helped those officers make a better choice?
One of the things that we're looking at now is, and we often teach police officers, just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should. And what we mean by that is, if you look back at the past 7 or 8 years in the law enforcement industry, particularly in some of these cases that have resulted in the death of someone, most of them emanate from a traffic stop. And so from a simple traffic stop where a person is simply asked to, show their driver's license or insurance or both, and that escalates all the way up to somebody's death. And so sometimes we see that police officers tend to escalate the scenario instead of de-escalating. And therefore, we teach police officers not to take things personally, to understand that it's simply a traffic stop. You're not stopping someone who is necessarily accused of murder, although sometimes they do find those individuals through a traffic stop. So once again, once the officer has cleared the call we often tell them, just de-escalate the situation and do not engage in a verbal exchange with the person, because ultimately, even though your ego may be bruised, you're going to likely face a situation that you may end your career, or may in fact at least bring into question the very act that you're trying to prevent. So that is one of those things that George Floyd's death has in fact impacted law enforcement since.
All right, Dr. Del Carmen, we appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newsy.
Thanks for having me.